the best portraits have an intense balance of sorts. No, it's not always a balance, but of vulnerability from both sides, sitter and portraitist, and anyway, and
Yeah.
the great thing is that you can never master this. I can never master this,
Sure.
no? Because the moment I think I master it, I've lost it.
I'm David Velasco. I'm the editor-in-chief of Artforum magazine, and I'm here today with Wolfgang Tillmans, who is the artist on our October cover. Thank you for being with us.
Hi, thanks for having me.
You just opened an incredibly successful show at MoMA. It's, I think it's, everyone that I've spoken with loves it. I love it. I think it's a real triumph. What's been the effect of that? Have you felt that in your own life? You've been building up to this moment for a long time, and now there's a lot of recognition. Do you feel like anything's shifted for you?
I mean, it's early days. No? I think it's 3 weeks now or so since the opening, and it certainly has had an impact that goes beyond a normal exhibition opening. Fortunately, the happiness about it also is longer. Often an exhibition, the happiness about it lasts kind of like a day or two, and then you're kind of back to, okay, next, or what do you do? How do you face the everyday?
And so you have this problem too. That's terrible.
Yeah, I wonder. Exactly the same. I guess the day you get the magazine is super exciting.
It's great.
The next day is still good, but after 2 days,
I've forgotten about it. Yeah.
It's and this one, well, it's special. It's alive, and that's why I also wanted to stay for a few weeks after. MoMA show will be reinstalled in Toronto in April and in San Francisco in November. But this had quite an impact. No? It was a little bit like a wedding, the celebrations, with the only difference that only the people that I liked were there. And
the best kind of party. I wonder if we could talk a little bit about the photo on the cover, which is an interesting photograph for you. It feels unusual in the sense that it actually has, like a place where it directs your attention, and it's, an engagement between two beings. The proportions and everything are actually very conventional, but it still has this Tillmans magic, and I'm curious actually if you could just tell me a little bit about this photo, like what was happening when it came about. It was 1995.
At the time, there was a lot of talk about authenticity, and I was a little bit anxious that people didn't realize that I don't work in one mode of representation and staging or non-staging, documentary or set up way, because most photographers work in one way, and in my case I have made photographs that are meticulously staged, that then have been seen as documentary, and other pictures that like Deer Hirsch, which looks set up, which is actually only freezing time for a few seconds. So I did intervene in it, but in the way that I told, stop, don't move, when I saw the analogy between the hands and the antlers. Yes, so this happened when Jochen Klein and me visited Cherry Grove for the first time and were surprised, to, like every first-time visitor to Fire Island, by the wild deer, and we fed whatever food we had somehow to this deer, and Jochen wanted to show that at the end there's nothing left. He showed empty hands, and I saw that and said, "Stop, hold it," and took the photograph.
When we think about photography, it's traditionally thought of as an indexical practice, which means that it's, in a very conceptual, straightforward manner, that what's on the paper is an actual reflection of something of the environment, like the light on the paper.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's directly registers its environment. And there's this other way in which your work is indexical just because of you and how you are adapting and adjusting to your environment, your social environment, your political environment. So it's both indexical, like in this one sense on the page, but it's also like an index of your navigation of the world.
Well, and my navigation of the medium,
right?
Because many works actually take the photographic paper as the subject of the photograph, and others take the chemical process as the image-giving source, like the silver works actually are traces of residue from the processing chemicals. And the Freischwimmer are looking as if they are indexical. They look like evidence, but they are actually entirely not representational.
How do you make them, actually? They're such beautiful works. They come at a very interesting moment in your career. Could you tell me when you started doing them and how they're made?
They started in 2000, first called Blushes. Mm-hmm. And they are made with light sources that I made for myself, and that I manipulate with my hands, where I can choose colors in the negative process. So there's no chemicals, no liquidity. All of that is in the viewer's mind later on. But the pictures happen completely dry, and then the exposed paper is fed through the processing machine as any other photograph that's been exposed by a negative. And I explain them at this detail, but no further, because people assume that they know that a portrait is done in such and such a way. But the qualities that make that portrait, the parameters that were really at play, you don't know. People just think they know, not like, oh, it's a camera. And so I kind of deliver an equal amount of information and say what it is.
Yeah. You want to preserve some mystery there also, in the same way that you want to preserve some mystery, I suppose, for...
I guess that's interesting with photography, more so today that everybody is a photographer, but throughout, people think they know what photography does, and from the side of the maker, I know so much what makes a good work really work is so subtle. If you approach it and try to explain it via what's in it, then actually those 2 lines description would hardly distinguish that picture of a human figure sitting with an arm on a table, or that a dancing body in a black backdrop. That doesn't really describe it.
But that's what Roland Barthes, when he started writing about photography, he invented this idea of the punctum. And I think that was his sort of like way of being like a je ne sais quoi about, there's this thing, mm-hmm. this magical thing that is a little undescribable or a little untraceable, that is what gives particular photographs makes them convincing in a different way. But it's true that when you get into the deep, rich specificity about why, like what makes a Wolfgang Tillmans photograph, why is it special. People tend to sputter. They don't really. It's hard to get a grasp of that.
And yet, so many know and feel it. I mean, I like to say it's like the medium is psychological. Like when I edit and visit pictures after a week or after a year, often the best way to really get to understand them and assess them is to ask myself, what did I think at the time? You know, what were my feelings? What, for example, if it say that like a still life, no, is it because I want to make another still life? Because if that is the reason, then the want is in the picture, and so I observed that early on, and realized that the moment you see the wanting, that is not very attractive. It's not very interesting, and so even when there are works that are very popular, I actually can't make more of them because there has to be some urgency that that allows me to see the subject afresh. And then there is a real curiosity, and when there is visual curiosity, that is then in the picture also. And so when I'm bored, it's very hard to make good art.
There's something, I've been thinking about this a lot, just, as an editor, I work with writers a lot, and I think often about what makes a good writer, how you actually become a good writer. And more, I've actually moved away from thinking that there's actually some sort of, there's a lot of technical skill, there's a lot of, there's a lot of knowledge you can bring to it, but there's something that I think that gets left out, and that's kind of an attitude toward writing, like what you're trying, like it's literally just, you could say like who is your audience for it, but it's literally just like how do you feel as you're approaching the page, and that is something that you can't translate. That's something that's very hard to teach. That's something that's very hard to convey. But more and more, I guess I just think that that's the most critical, if not the most critical, one of the most critical facets of being a good writer, probably being a good artist in general. Is attitude.
Interesting that we end up there, and like the importance of observation, I find, is just so never to be underestimated, and to observe again as a writer just as much as a maker of visual work is to understand why are you doing this, from what perspective, and why do I observe the way I observe, and always understand that we are selective in what we notice. And so I'm always trying to notice what I didn't see and question what I didn't see.
At a certain point, you mentioned music videos. You started making music maybe 5 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, but you waited a while to do that. There was a moment. What happened that prompted you to feel like you wanted to actually try your hand at music?
It was actually the sabbatical of 14. Around that time, after I concluded work on Neue Welt, the project that I worked on roughly 2009, 10, 11, 12, and traveled to 37 countries on 5 continents, and kind of learned a new language, how to speak with a digital camera that is much sharper than what my eye can see, something that I was never interested in the past, and that was like a whole reinvention, that process. Then I had a sense of wanting to be more present in a performative way. And one morning I somehow saw the little bit of daylight which fell through a crack in the curtain onto the opposite wall, and I started to play with this shadow and I started to dance and created a rhythm with my feet, and somehow I was dancing to that rhythm at the same time I was making that rhythm, and I was playing with the shadow, and I filmed it, and that's important, no? That you take such a little thing serious enough to actually put the camera on a tripod and film it.
I love the idea that actually it started with dancing, that the dancing created the rhythm. But I mean, it's such a great reversal of how you think that the music would work. The dancing creates the rhythm, that this image and this filming then creates the larger apparatus.
I then revisited an audio recording I made of a printing press, because I sometimes go to the printings of my books, and I've always loved the rhythm of the machines, and so I made a first track which is based on the rhythms of a Heidelberg Speedmaster press, and which was called "Make It Up As You Go Along." Came out in 2016, together with 3 songs from 1986, which I did as a teenager together with a friend, and I had cassette recordings of them, and at Trick Studio, Klaus and Tim Knapp restored them, and then sort of listened in very carefully like what instruments there were, and replayed some of them and laid them under the restored recording, and so there is the first record spans 30 years. One side is 86, the other is 2016. Last year I released the first full-length album after several EPs called Moon and Earthlight, and so I've been hesitant, but yeah, it's now, I guess, part of what I do.
Definitely. No, and it's a great part of what you do, and it's also, it's something you speak so passionately about. It's clearly something that very much interests you.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So it somehow happened organically, but reconnecting to really the second passion in my life from the teenage days. No?
Totally. I would be curious, you mentioned earlier your passion, but also your ambivalence around newspapers and reportage. And I was curious what you think critics get most wrong about your work.
I think the people are very focusing on the 90s, on the narrative, and that somehow comes from that, and somehow think that it's clear what that was, and as if it was one thing, and you know what it was 10 long years that that completely shifted and shaped and changed in the course of those 10 years, and that were very much self-reflective and media reflective in the wider world, but strongly within me. What then happened in the 2000 decade was, like a complete different reaction to the huge proliferation of photography in the late 90s, and almost a withdrawal, and the turning towards photographs without camera. This is all thinking about photography and about the meaning of and why take pictures, and then that led to this desire to face the world again, the outside world, after these 2,000 years of maybe a more inward art. And then, how do you talk? I mean, nobody has talked about science fiction, hier und jetzt zufrieden sein, to be content in the here and now. The collaboration with Isa Genskin and myself, which is this huge sculptural work we did in the atrium of MoMA 20 years ago.
It is always, of course, yeah. I think it's tricky when you're working with somebody who has worked so richly and deeply for so long, and whose work is so built into the fabric of their life, to actually tell that story in any sort of way that's not going to reduce it or focus on something that's a little easy. I think it's interesting to me that a lot of the reviews yeah, you're right, that nobody mentions the collaboration with Isa, which is because it's interesting because it's huge.
Yes.
It's hard to miss. But people have really gravitated towards the work in the 90s. And I wonder...
As does your article in Artforum.
Exactly. And I wonder if it's partly... I wonder if it would have been the same 15, 20 years ago, or if there's something very specific, some kind of nostalgia, some kind of like capacity to even see what was happening in the 90s.
Yes.
That's now emerged for certain writers, that's the story that they want to tell, or that's the story they feel like they can tell best.
Because it's of course about their own life, no?
Yeah.
and their own moment, and how that intersects. And no, it was completely different. The reception and the writing in 2017 at the Tate exhibition and Fondation Bayerle. I think there is a sense of distinct change. No? The optimism, and the 90s were actually not all optimistic, no? But there was a positive outlook that things would get better. And obviously, let's not go into that too deep, but yeah, I mean, this time is over.
Yeah.
We are in a new period, and of course more so since this year than ever in the last 6 years.